But Richard's leadership of the OBR, but also his public service, both at the Treasury and in other organisations over many years, is distinguished public service, and I certainly thank him for that. But I am grateful as well to have the opportunity to make a statement and to reiterate in the strongest terms that leaks are unacceptable. The budget had too much speculation, there were too many leaks, and much of those leaks and speculation were inaccurate, very damaging, as well as the IT security issues, Dame Meg, which you've already mentioned, where the entire budget was inadvertently published an hour before I stood up to present the budget to the House. The OBR's report also noted that the spring statement had been accessed early as well. I want to stay on the record how frustrated I am and have been by these incidents and the volume of speculation and leaks. And that is why I'm doing something about it, because we cannot allow this to happen again. A leak inquiry is underway with my full support, being led by the Permanent Secretary at the Treasury, and we are also conducting a review of the Treasury security processes to inform future fiscal events. We also clearly need to look explicitly at physical IT security. The Treasury have asked the National Centre for Cyber Security to undertake a forensic examination of recent economic and financial outlooks. The outcome of that review, of course, will be public, and we will write to you with the outcomes of that review.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can I just turn to you, Permanent Secretary, about the OBR? Do you know yet who in government or which department accessed the forecast early in March?
So you'll have seen the report given to the Chancellor and yourselves. We've asked the National Cyber Security Centre to do a forensic examination of that.
You don't know the answer to that right now?
Well, I would note that a media organisation has stated publicly that they accessed the March statement.
Okay, but there was the report suggested that there was access from within the government circle.
Yep,
so you don't know. Yeah, so the March report, you don't know who that was.
No, but we've got a process underway with the top level in government of National Cyber Security Centre to ascertain a forensic examination of what happened, including in March, and we'll report back publicly on that.
Are you waiting for the full access issues, or are you going to be looking particularly at that March one because it was likely? It sounds like it was leaked from within government.
Well, I don't know what happened on that, and we'll see. I'm waiting. My intention is that the review I do into budget security will be informed by the National Cyber Security Centre's forensic examination of what happened on IT security. It'll also be informed by the leak inquiry underway, and of course lessons learned from this budget.
Okay, it's just that it seems to me that could be quite quick and easy to find out which bit of government could access the forecast early in March, because that's quite a serious issue, isn't it? Because it was within government.
So to the detail, the review to you and the Chancellor suggested there was a single access in March. It suggested that might be benign. Since then, a media organisation has stated that they accessed it. So I think that's the latest of where we are. So I don't know whether that is the same. I don't know whether it's less benign than we think and that was them, or there's more access to it. But we will get to the bottom of that via this review.
Okay, and so we're waiting for the whole review to get the answer to that particular point. Okay, what's the timescale for that review?
I would hope to conclude everything ahead of the spring statement, so early in the new year.
Okay, well, we'll keep in touch with you on that. And, Permanent Secretary or Chancellor, do you yet know what the recruitment timetable is for Richard Hughes' successor as Chair of the OBR?
Well, I met with Tom Josephs and David Miles earlier this week, along with the Permanent Secretary, to thank them for their service and for continuing in their roles. It is unlikely that for the spring forecast we have a new chair, because obviously we need to go through a rigorous process, and they are happy and confident that they can lead us through that. But of course we'll go through a rigorous process, and we will advertise the role as soon as is possible.
Okay, so as soon as possible before Christmas, early New Year?
I think it's most likely to be early in the new year. It's only a week or so until the Christmas recess, and we'll put it out as soon as we can.
That's fine. Thank you very much for that. Chancellor, I mean, you've made a statement about leaks, and we need to put to you the questions you obviously you answered very clearly to the Shadow Chancellor yesterday in the House. But just to be clear, I think we need to just go through a few points. Are you in control of all media briefings that emanate from the Treasury and political operations inside number 11?
Yes, and myself and the team officials are very clear about the Macpherson principles. Of course, as I said yesterday in Parliament, I did not disclose confidential information, but as I've also been clear, there have been leaks, and that's why we've set up a leak inquiry, and that is why we are doing this work. So that investigation is happening at the moment to ensure future budget security, including, as we've already discussed just now, making sure that the OBR as well. And just for your information, we are working with the OBR on IT security, and so in the spring they will publish via gov.uk rather than on their own platforms. So that's the first step.
The independent report, like you and Martin and others indicated. So you're in control of media briefings. Are you therefore responsible for all media briefings that emanate from the Treasury in number 11?
As I've just said, Dame Meg, there were leaks that were clearly not authorised. And that is very serious, which is why there is this review going on. But if you'd like me to address specifically the issues on the 13th of November, I'm very
well,
happy.
Certainly, if I can get to that. I mean, but in the lead up to the budget more generally, there's obviously a very tight circle of people who are aware of information. I mean, the information about potential rate movements for income tax is probably one of the most protected bits of information, I would imagine, in the system. Roughly how many people would be aware of that information?
I don't want to give you a number without being able to check the number of people who...
Secretary?
So the leak inquiry will set that out and set out the recommendations. The answer is that we have all sorts of security things in place for any budget. Those have been repeatedly tightened, but clearly we're going to have to revisit and reset, and it is going to be imperative to increase our security, and that's very much my intention.
Okay, and you, Permanent Secretary, said to this committee in February when we were in Darlington, that was around leaks at that time, and I quote, "You really do not want to give a running commentary on that or publish things as it goes along because that would be extremely market sensitive and therefore deeply unwelcome." I'm assuming you still agree with that
very much so.
Approach. And Chancellor, you said on the 10th of November to the BBC, it would actually, so let me go into the issues around let's go to the 13th of November. So the Financial Times reported then that the Prime Minister and Chancellor have ripped up earlier proposals to raise the basic and higher income tax rates, according to officials briefed on the move, amid fears it would anger voters and further antagonise mutinous Labour MPs. Well, perhaps not all, perhaps we would agree with the characterisation, but that's what was reported. So I just don't understand why you don't know yet who those officials are. Do you know who those officials are, Mr. Bowler?
Should we go through the timeline?
So on the 4th of November, I gave a speech where I set out my priorities for the budget: to cut the cost of living, to cut NHS waiting lists, and to cut the debt and the deficit. I was clear in that speech that I wanted to build more resilient public finances with the headroom to withstand global turbulence. As you saw when I delivered my budget, I was able to increase the fiscal headroom from £9.9 billion that I delivered in the spring to £21.7 billion, so more than doubling the headroom.
Yes, we know those facts.
I was clear that to achieve those objectives, that we will all have to contribute. On Thursday, the 13th of November, there was a leak to the Financial Times about one element of the budget. The leak presented partial and inaccurate information and an inaccurate picture of the budget strategy. The implication that some could take from that story would have been that I had ditched core elements of the budget strategy that I'd set out just a few days before in that speech, and that I wasn't going to build up the headroom that I had previously said was necessary. This wasn't true. And so both the Treasury and Number 10 issued statements on the 14th of November on the record to the press to be clear that the budget priorities stood, including to build more resilience into the public finances with headroom to withstand global turbulence. It was very important because the story in the FT was both partial and inaccurate, and it was important that quickly we ensured that people understood that the strategy that I set out publicly on the 4th of November was still stood.
Can I just say, this is a story by George Parker, a very renowned political journalist at the FT, and he did say, according to officials briefed on the move. That's quite direct for an off-the-record briefing. It is very, and he's not the sort of journalist who...
It was not an off-the-record briefing, it was a leak.
You're really clear it was a leak?
I'm absolutely categorical that was not an authorised briefing. It was incredibly damaging and frustrating. That is why we have a leak inquiry. Okay. It was not briefing that was signed off by me, any of my ministers or officials. It was unacceptable. That is why there is a leak inquiry going on.
Okay. And so, Mr. Bowler, this is cited according to officials briefed on the move. So is your leak inquiry looking at officials?
Yes.
Is it looking at advisors?
Yes.
Is it looking at ministers?
Yes, and it's being carried out by the Cabinet Office to do the leak inquiry, so it's a look at the Treasury and wider departments that would...
Okay, and you don't...
And of course it is right that it looks at all those people. That is not suggesting that we think any of those people are responsible, but everybody who had access to information should rightly be part of that leak inquiry.
Absolutely, and I think we would not expect anything different from you. Mr. Boulder, where did you get with the leak inquiry about the story to Bloomberg in March?
I wrote to you on that in March, and the conclusion of that was the inquiry was not clear whether it was a leak or speculation.
Okay, so what do you rate chances in 1 to 10 of getting an answer on this leak inquiry?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. I would say that it is not the case that leak inquiries don't get anywhere. It is the case that even in the last year across government, civil servants, I'll just speak to them, have been found to accidentally or deliberately leak information, and that has led to action, including dismissal. And secondly, I would say that we'll we'll see the recommendations of this leak inquiry and we'll take action on them. I'm sure it will give us a recommendation about how many people knew things and the extent to which that's greater than what we intended for how many people knew things. That will be a useful piece of information which will want us to lead to being much more careful still on who knows what when, and I'm pretty determined.
I think everyone will want that to work. You've got, on Thursday last week, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury told the House that there would be this inquiry into the leaks, so we welcomed that at the time. Which leaks? Because the Chancellor, you've spoken about the one to the Financial Times in 13th of November. Will the inquiry, Mr. Permanent Secretary, cover all of the other information?
That is the main focus, because that was the clearly very damaging leak, and that's where the focus of things is going. But obviously it's for the inquiry to take it where they will.
Okay. Can we just move on to the OBR's misgivings about the communications, because that's what led the OBR to write a letter. And I just think it would be helpful for the record, Permanent Secretary, if you could be clear that the information that the OBR provided in that letter was not unusual. A lot of it's in the EFO anyway. Yes. It was only the two, round 1 and round 2, that were additional information provided to
yes,
this committee.
Yes, that's right. And I'd also point out, and I think there's been some confusion about this, that it's worth saying that the Treasury, as in the Chancellor,
agreed that
took the extraordinary step to agree to release that information to deliver, including to this committee, maximum transparency about all of this. I would also say that it would be our endeavours, I think the OBR and ourselves, to now return those discussions to private, which is the best bet for policy making here, so that in future events we can exchange forecast information in private to take the right policy decisions.
We asked the OBR that question last week about whether they would be willing to make this a regular thing. They had no particular objection. So you're saying that the Treasury would not want to provide the Treasury Select Committee with that information post the budget?
Well, look, there's a debate to be had, and some countries do things do things differently, and we can look at that, but it would be my prior that you need that it's for good policy making you reserve the right for privacy between those things. I'd also point out that
the Chancellor's nodding on that, so Chancellor, you agree with the Permanent Secretary?
Yes, I agree with the Permanent Secretary.
I'd also point out that a feature since I think 2022 is the OBR published the timetable of when they're sending their forecasts to the Treasury. And I think you had evidence, the Lords Economic Affairs Committee had evidence from Andy King and others. I mean, the fact that they published that timetable does lead to quite a lot of speculation about what each forecast says. So, maybe
when did you first know about the letter? When did the OBR start talking to you about writing that letter? When did you agree?
The OBR said they were minded to write a letter. We said we'd agree with that writing of that letter. The original intention was that would be published on budget day, and the OBR took the decision to delay that for obvious reasons. Okay,
so they approached you, but you agreed it straight. Yeah. Can you remember what time frame that was in?
In the immediate run up to the budget.
So during November.
Yeah, during November.
Okay. And just finally for me, Chancellor, on the 10th of November, you said to the BBC, and I quote, "It would of course be possible to stick with the manifesto commitments, but that would require things like deep cuts in capital spending." And you clearly set out, as you mentioned earlier, a strategy for your budget, and you set out those two options: breach the manifesto or cut capital spending. So could you just be clear for the record which one you chose?
Well, I said in my speech on the 4th of November everyone would have to contribute. We were able to keep that contribution as low as we did by using a range of more progressive tax, like the high-value council tax, the gambling tax, the tax on dividends and property.
Which we'll get into in the session.
Yes,
but of those two, you set out very clearly on the 10th of November, those were your two options. So what you're saying really is you didn't seem to go for either of them. Is that fair characterisation?
Well, of course, there are always other options available, and there's a number of policies that leading up to the budget that we cost, as the Prime Minister has been clear.
Very starkly on the 10th.
Well, those are two options. Those are two options that were available, as the Prime Minister has subsequently said. We did look at whether we needed to increase the rates of income tax, given our concerns around the forecast and particularly the productivity downgrade, which took £16 billion off in terms of revenues in the final year of the forecast. In the end, that wasn't necessary, but we did, as I set out in my speech of the 4th of November, ask everyone to contribute by freezing the thresholds that the previous government had frozen for 7 years by an additional 3 years from 2028.
We can get into figures, but the 16 billion obviously was offset by other measures, so it was about a 6 billion gap, wasn't it?
Well, that's not entirely correct. The £16 billion is the result of the productivity downgrade because of higher wage inflation and price inflation. There were also higher tax revenues. But higher inflation is not a good thing because, of course, that erodes the spending power of government. So I wouldn't characterise it as we had good news on inflation. Far from it. In fact, I was very clear in my speech on the 4th of November that one of the objectives of the budget was to reduce that inflation, which was, of course, resulting in higher tax revenues, but not for a good reason. And so a revenue that was available was, you could say it's welcome from fiscal terms, but of course it's not really welcome because we wanted lower inflation. I think it's just really important, Chair and Committee, that we don't see the revenues from higher inflation as somehow being good news during the forecast process.
No one was suggesting it was good news, but it offset the 16 billion to a degree.
But of course we wanted to reduce that inflation, which is exactly what we did, as the Deputy Governor of the Bank said to you yesterday,
well, indeed, 0.4
to 0.5% off of inflation next year.
The bank was clear to us yesterday they're still on their trajectory towards 2%, which steady.
I think the Deputy Governor was a bit clearer than that. I think she gave evidence to this committee yesterday saying that next year 0.4 to 0.5 percentage points off inflation because of the measures in the budget.
Yeah, well, she was very clear about that, as on the record. Mr. Ball, a final question from me about the leak inquiry. Will you be publishing it?
Yes.
To the world or to this committee?
I'll be publishing my review, which will include the actions we're taking from the recommendations of the leak inquiry, yes.
Would it be possible for this committee to see the full inquiry in a confidential?
I'd have to engage with the people doing the inquiry about their views on that, but I wouldn't like to.
I have to say, I think I can say with confidence, as chair of this committee doesn't leak. So we would obviously be very careful about any sensitive information, but we have done that in previous, as you know, in my previous role.
Yes, I do.
A lot of sensitive information. So if we could take that offline. John Glenn MP.
Thank you. Can I turn to the sequence of events? The last piece of meaningful data from the OBR was the 4.2 billion figure on the 31st of October. On the scene setter number 11 press conference on Tuesday the 4th, the impression was left by everything that was covered that income tax was going up. And in your interview, Chancellor, with Pippa Crair of The Guardian, you said that you didn't know the size of the downgrade, the productivity, and that after that press conference, raising of income tax remained on the table. What I don't understand is what further data points came from the OBR after the 31st of October, because as far as I can see, there wasn't any meaningful data.
Chancellor.
Thank you very much. As you'll know from your time at the Treasury, pre-measures is not the final word from the Office of Budget Responsibility, because then you have post-measures forecasts as well. And in the post-measures forecast, they take into account the policy decisions that we take as a government on tax and spend. And the OBR rightly do their own analysis of the revenue that different measures raise. And so there was plenty of additional information being shared between the OBR and the Treasury between the 30th of October and Major Measures 1 and indeed Major Measures 2. So I think it is not right to say, and I think you'll know this from your time at the Treasury, that the 4...
I was never Chancellor.
Longest serving economic secretary since the Second World War.
The point I'm making is, I want to just try and clarify that there were more meaningful data points between the 4th and the 13th, 14th of November.
Yes,
and what led to those being meaningfully different?
Yeah, yes, there was, and the reason for that is that the OBR do costings of all of the changes that we're making, as well as there being interactions between the tax measures and other economic variables, whether that be GDP, consumption, inflation. And so all of this is changing. It was a big budget. I think we can all agree that. And every measure both has its own impact, but also a cumulative impact. So there was a lot more information between those. The other thing I would just add is that the 4.2 billion was not the number that we were using at the Treasury, because there was also the policy decisions between Spring Statement and autumn budget that meant that the £4.2 billion headroom was actually, from our reckonings, around a £3 billion deficit against our fiscal rules. So not only was 4.2 billion not the last word from the OBR, but it's not the number we were using internally at the Treasury.
The clear impression left from the scene setter press conference on the 4th was that income tax was going up. I mean, that was what every newspaper was saying. Well, income tax was going up.
I'll answer that.
And then 10 days later, it wasn't. So what could you tell us about what happened about your decision-making process during those 10 days?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, in the speech in the 4th of November, I was very clear that everyone would have to make a contribution. And you saw that in the budget on the 26th of November. We froze for an additional 3 years the tax thresholds, national insurance and income tax, that the previous government had frozen for 7 years. We extended that for a further 3 3 years. That's not a breach of the manifesto, but it is asking everybody to contribute more. I was very upfront about that.
Raise taxes for working people.
And I was very upfront in my speech in Parliament when I delivered the budget that would mean that everyone was having to contribute in exactly the way that I set out in my speech on the 4th of November. So I stand by very much the speech I made. I said in that speech that we were going to cut the cost of living. We did 0.4, 0.5 off of inflation next year, as Claire Lombardelli said to you yesterday. Cutting NHS waiting lists, we've already reduced them by 250,000. We protected NHS spending in the budget, and also cutting the debt and the deficit, which you can see in the OBR and Treasury documents. But I was also very clear in that speech, both that we would need to build more fiscal resilience given global turbulence, which we did, taking the headroom to £21.7 billion, but also that we would have to ask everyone to contribute.
Did you decide to change the decision not in terms of raising the rate of income tax in those 10 days?
The Prime Minister has been clear that that was one of the things that we looked at, but we were also looking at the tax thresholds. In the end, because of the decisions we made on higher value council tax, on property and dividends, and a number of other measures, we were able to keep the contribution from working people as low as we possibly could.
Did you make that decision, or did the Prime Minister?
Well, the Prime Minister and I met 2-3 times a week during the budget process. That is not always the case between Chancellors and Prime Ministers, I recognise that, but there is a very close partnership between myself and the Prime Minister, and so we took him through all of these all of the numbers and all of the options, and we decided it together as a team, because that is what the Prime Minister and I am.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Chancellor, in the run-up to the general election, you said that you had no plans for tax rises beyond what was in your manifesto, and that you would focus on growth, and that growth was really the way in which you were going to get more tax revenues coming in. You've now put together two of the biggest tax-raising budgets in UK history. And the Office for Budget Responsibility has told us that there's not a single measure overall that has a positive growth impact. They think, in fact, that tax hikes are harming growth. So can you tell us what your growth plan is? It's not one of the priorities of this budget. Are you still chairing the Growth Mission Board?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. First of all, and you know, we've been through this a number of times. There was new information after the general election. First of all, the £22 billion black hole in the public finances left by the previous government,
which has been discredited by the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Not at all. The £22 billion black hole left by the previous government, which was set out to me by Treasury officials the weekend that I became Chancellor of the Exchequer, which we had to fill, and then the £16 billion downgrade to productivity, the impact that had on fiscal revenues. And as the Office of Budget Responsibility were very clear, that reflects the weak productivity in the previous Parliament. The OBR made the decision to do that revision this summer, but they were very clear it doesn't reflect any policies of this government. So those are the two key things that have changed since the general election. And of course, I did go into the general election with the targeted tax increases on non-DOMs, on private equity, on private schools, on the energy profits levy that we were elected to deliver. We have delivered those. We have had to do additional tax raising because of the mess left by the previous government. But you've also asked about growth. Well, shall I finish answering your question, Dame Harriet?
Yeah.
You've asked about economic growth. You will know that in the spring, the OBR upgraded their growth forecasts. It was the biggest upgrade to growth from a non-fiscal measure that the OBR in their 15-year history now has ever made, and that reflected the changes that we made to planning. And they also upgraded the growth forecast because of the capital investment that this government is prioritising. Of course, under the previous government's plans, capital investment was due to fall in this Parliament. I protected capital investment and have continued to do so, even in this challenging budget with the productivity downgrade. So the OBR have been very clear that both the planning reforms voted against, I believe, by the Conservative Party and also the capital expenditure, which the Conservatives were going to cut, has resulted in an upgrade of productivity. And indeed, if you look at, during budget week, made further progress on a third runway at Heathrow. We signed off the film studio in Marlow that had been opposed by Buckinghamshire Council and that we called in. And since the budget, JP Morgan have announced a huge investment in Canary Wharf. Goldman Sachs have announced that they're doubling their headcount of jobs in Birmingham, and in addition, the Co-op have announced that they are freezing or cutting 2,700 prices in store. These are all pro-growth measures, but probably the most pro-growth of all is the 5 interest rate cuts that we've had from the Bank of England since the general election. That's only possible because of the stability that we've provided after the chaos we had in previous years.
So you chose not to put any new growth measures in this budget.
Well, that's exactly. No, that's not what I said. Dame Harriet. Sorry, Dame Harriet.
Perhaps, Dame Harriet, if you ask a question, then the Chancellor can.
But don't contradict what I've just said. Yes, we have regular meetings of the Growth Mission Board, but I did not say, in the answer to my question, as you suggested, that there were no growth measures in this budget. Far from it. In the week of the budget, we made further progress on the runway at Heathrow. We signed off the film studio in Marlow. Jamie Dimon, the chief executive of JP Morgan, who could invest in any country in the world, chose the day after the budget, referencing the actions that I had taken in the budget, that as a result of that, he would be making the investment in Canary Wharf. Similarly, Goldman Sachs, a company that could invest in any country in the world, announced the following day, because of the measures in my budget, that he was investing in Britain.
Thank you. Questions.
Do you accept, Chancellor, that your revealed preference now in terms of the 2 budgets you've brought in is that you hike taxes a lot, and that the speculation and the impact of the speculation in the run-up to this budget had a real-world impact in terms of people's decisions, in terms of mortgages, in terms of people making decisions on their pensions, in terms of a range of different things that changed behaviour within businesses? A lot of businesses said they put decisions on hold, and that this impression that you're ready to go for tax rises is going to hang over this country's economy for the rest of this Parliament.
Of course, the previous government took taxes to a record high and saw interest rates go through the roof. And since the general... No, I'm not surprised you don't want to hear about the previous government, nor the voters.
Budget measures. Can I just have
there we are. There's a rare moment of agreement. No one wants to hear about the previous government.
Questions and answers would be good, please.
Yes, which is what I'm trying to do, Dame Meg. We have returned stability to the economy, which has enabled the Bank of England to cut interest rates 5 times, and as you would have seen since the budget, a number of mortgage lenders have cut interest rates on mortgages. I think interest rates now on mortgages are lower than they were since the Prime Minister, maybe one who you might not want to remember as well, Liz Truss, took interest rates through the roof. I very much welcome that. Again, those reductions in interest rates would not have been possible without the stability that I've returned to the economy.
We're going to get into measures in a moment, Dame Meg, but last year I asked you, Chancellor, about the way in which you're implementing all the Article 4 recommendations from the IMF in terms of, you're basically going through the whole list of recommendations and ticking them off one by one. Last year I asked you if you were planning any overhaul of council tax. You said, no, we're not looking at that. I asked you if you were looking at road pricing. You said, no, we're not looking at road pricing. I would argue that you've started the process on both of those in this budget. There are a couple more measures that I think the public out there would be very interested in hearing if you can rule those out. Capital gains on primary residences, are you planning to do that in this Parliament? And are you planning to change the state pension to a single lock in this Parliament? Can you rule those out, please?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chancellor. Luke Murphy, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, just very briefly, you've pointed to the productivity downgrade as a result of the record of the previous government. Would you have made different choices in this budget if it were not for that downgrade, and if so, which ones?
Chancellor.
Well, thank you very much for your question. The productivity downgrade by 0.3 percentage points took £16 billion off of headroom in the final year. Obviously has bigger impacts than that, because the impacts is not just on fiscal revenues. The impacts are also felt in people's wage packets, so certainly the forecast for those future wage packages, because productivity is obviously the biggest driver of growth, and therefore the biggest driver of the money available in the economy, including for wages. So it is very disappointing that the conclusion is, after the last 14 years, including the botched Brexit deal, the impact of the pandemic and the impact of the policy decisions of previous governments, has resulted in our productivity being so much lower than the Office of Budget Responsibility previously forecast. Well, I guess I'm Chancellor in the world as it is, and rather than the world as I might want it to be. But of course, if the circumstances are different, I would have made different decisions. It goes back from the point from Dame Harriet, the reasons why we have had to raise taxes in the last two budgets were last year because of the £22 billion black hole in the public finances, and this year because of the £16 billion downgrade to productivity forecasts. I'm determined to beat those forecasts. We beat them this year. The OBR forecast in the spring that our economy would grow by just 1% this year. They have now upgraded that forecast to 1.5%, and I'm determined to beat them in future years, because the Conservative legacy does not have to be our destiny, which is why we're pursuing a whole range of growth policies.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Thank you. Chris Coughlin, MP.
Thank you, Dame Meg. Chancellor, you know that I'm a fan of the government's language on public R&D. The OBR has published that a 10% increase in UK R&D capital would equate to a 1.9% long-term increase in productivity, which are stunning numbers given the 0.3% productivity downgrade created a 16 billion fiscal black hole. So what I'm struggling to understand is why you're only increasing public R&D by 0.7% a year, 13% in total to 2030. As a result of which, the OBR has concluded that that will have no impact on growth, because in fact it's a lower rate than in the decade after the financial crisis.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Coughlin. There's one thing we know about you, is that you care very much about R&D, and rightly so. And I was very pleased in the spending review to be able to increase R&D spending in real terms during the course of this Parliament. And I said earlier, the OBR did take into account our CDEL spending, which includes R&D, in their forecasts. And CDEL, the higher CDEL budgets is one of the things that contributes to their higher growth forecasts. So R&D is one of the things that is contributing to that. But you're right to mention it, and right to mention the importance of it. Obviously, public R&D is really important, and that is what we can influence, but so is private R&D. And I am pleased that one of the reasons why growth for this year has been revised up is because investment has been higher, and that's very important.
Of course, but given your belief in public R&D, I mean, do you think it's okay that we are only in the middle of the G7 in terms of our rate of public R&D, and that the UK has had the worst productivity crisis, as you said, since the financial crisis?
Yes, look, and the OBR are clear about some of those reasons for the productivity downgrade. As I said to Mr. Murphy, the Brexit deal, the pandemic, and the decisions of the previous government. The plans that I inherited from the previous government would have seen capital spending as a share of GDP fall from, I think, 2.5% to 1.9%. We've managed to protect that, to grow it in real terms during the course of this Parliament, and that's one of the reasons why I believe that we can beat the productivity forecasts that the OBR have set out in their most recent documents.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. John Grady, MP.
Thank you very much, Dame Meg. Last week, Dr. Beck Fries from PIMCO told us that UK fiscal finances are in a fairly fragile state. Bond investors are focused on actual deficit reduction over the next 2 years, as opposed to what is forecast or promised for 2029-30. Is that, Chancellor, where you think the bond markets are too?
So I think it's best if chancellors don't get into comment on bond markets. But what I would say is this: we were very focused on these issues when we put together the budget package, both increasing the fiscal headroom, which goes from 9.9 to 21.7 billion pounds, but also on fiscal consolidation. And I recognise that fiscal consolidation needs to be consistent through the Parliament. So for the last few years, public sector net borrowing as a share of GDP has hovered around 5%. This year, 25-26, it is due to fall to 4.5%. That is the first time, I think, in almost 5 years the PSMB has been less than 5%. It's then forecast to fall to 3.5%, 3%, 2.6%, and then 1.9% in the final 2 years of the forecast. And the IMF has said that this is the fastest rate of fiscal consolidation of any country in the G7. And that is the right approach, because it is still the case that we have elevated borrowing costs. The borrowing costs that the UK government faces went up substantially in September, October 2022 for reasons that we all know and understand. But I want to bring those borrowing costs down, and fiscal consolidation is an important part of that.
On the tightening, Chancellor, what a lot of commentators point out is that the savings, much of the savings are back-ended to 29-30. Much of the tax rises are also back-ended, but we have real pressures at the back end of these forecasts. 6 billion of SEND provision moved across, defence spending going up, but there's a real risk it has to increase further, and a general election in August 2029. So last week, our expert economists, I would say, appeared less than confident that this tightening was politically achievable. Do you believe those economists to be wrong?
I believe in the numbers that I set out in my budget, and a lot of people have got views of what I was going to do in my budget and whether I'll be able to live within the means set in my budgets, but we have consistently done that, and we've increased the headroom. We've also set out just before the summer recess our spending review, and I was very clear that public services now need to live within that envelope, and we are legislating for the tax increases that were in the budget. That is also very important to give confidence that these tax increases will indeed happen and that public services will live within the budgets that I've set.
And would it have created more confidence if we brought some of this tightening forward, given that lenders take the view that the UK has for many, many years lacked fiscal credibility?
Chancellor.
Well, we want to make sure that we get things right. And so for the high value council tax, for example, we are revaluing properties in G and H. That cannot be done for next spring or the spring after. Similarly, on things like electric vehicle EVED, those changes can't come in overnight. I think that everybody recognises that, and that we need to take the legislation through to achieve those things. But we will legislate so that markets and everyone else can have confidence that these plans will go ahead.
Thank you very much. John Gunn MP.
Yeah, if we look at the defence spending, government's stated goal to get 3.5% of GDP, we look at health spending maintaining its long-run average growth rate and education spending being held flat in per pupil terms. And the announcements of the budget, according to the Resolution Foundation, said that there will be 6.4 billion of real term increase between 28 and 29, and that means 88% of what is commonly known by the Labour Party as austerity 2010 to 15 measures. So isn't there a real risk that even your manifesto said 7 billion in tax increases, your first budget was 40 billion, now 26 billion, you're still going to have very, very tough settlements outside those three departments?
We have now made those settlements, and when I became Chancellor, there hadn't been a spending review for a number of years.
Yeah.
We had negotiations, we came to the settlement in the spending review, and departments are now living within those settlements. That should be the confidence that is needed to show that we will be able to do that through this period. And even in the last years of the forecast, real term spending on public services continues to increase by nearly 1%. That is very different from the 2% cuts to public spending in the first years of the 5 years of the coalition government.
So you don't recognise the pressure on other departments at the end of the period 28-29 to 29-30?
Well, departments are always under pressure. There's always more things to spend on than you can afford to, and that's why prioritisation is so important. Those settlements are not imposed. They are negotiated and agreed with departments.
Chancellor, I totally recognise the integrity of the spending review process, but I'm just saying that if you align the reasonable expectations of health spending, education spending, and your aspirations on defence, all the other departments have a pressure which is pretty much resonates with what happened between 2010 and 2015. That's the fact.
Oh, but one of the differences is that in the early years we had an immediate uplift in spending to end the fiscal fiction, frankly, that previously existed in the forecasts. And similarly, we've protected the CDEL budget. So if you look at TDEL, it is a slightly different picture. And the reason that we've done that is because we
just
want
to be clear for people watching, the capital budget.
We protected the capital budget, which is really important for improving the productivity of public services. We've also agreed with departments £14 billion worth of efficiency savings. We are tracking those closely, and we are delivering against those targets. We set out further efficiency targets in the budget this year, again, which all departments have signed up to.
Final question, but what you're saying is there will be no more money for those other departments beyond what you've set out already in 28, 29, 29, 30?
Well, I've always been really clear that in the end we have to grow our economy to deliver the money that we need to keep increasing living standards and have the money to deliver our public services, which is why growth is the number one priority of this government. And as we saw, if you just had 0.3% higher productivity growth, which would translate to 0.3% higher GDP growth, you'd have £16 billion more a year to either reduce taxes or spend on public services.
But it is true
that
that
is why growth is so important.
Beyond this year, which I recognise the change that you've quoted, in all future years, the OBR say that growth is downgraded consequential of this budget decision.
Not consequential of this budget, Mr. Glenn, and I want to be really clear about that. The reason for the productivity downgrade, the OBR say explicitly, that is not because of the decisions, any of the decisions that this government has made. In fact, they've scored positively both the CDEL, the capital spending, and also the planning reforms.
It's lower in every subsequent year.
But not because of government policy, because of the productivity downgrade based on the previous 14 years before we took office.
Thank you, Chancellor. Yuan Yang MP.
Thank you, Chair. So at Budget Day, the OBR announced that it was going to use a new higher threshold for scoring the impact of policy on economic capacity. This higher threshold would have ruled out the majority of policy changes scored under your Conservative predecessor. Did you have a discussion, did the Treasury have a discussion about this change of policy with the OBR, and were there policies that you wish would have been scored that may have been close to that threshold that were not scored as a result of this change in criteria?
In the end, what really matters is not whether something is scored or not, but whether you actually get the growth or not. And so when we are, deciding on policies as the Treasury, we don't sort of say what will the OBR score. We say what will actually deliver the growth. And I've been really clear from opposition and into government that our growth mission is built on the pillars of stability, investment and reform. Stability that comes from strong fiscal rules that are stuck to and not just changed on a whim because the numbers don't turn out the way you want to, and we've stuck to those fiscal rules in 2 budgets, a spending review and a spring forecast. We are delivering with greater headroom, the highest headroom now for a number of years. Investment by protecting the capital investment and crowding in private investment, including through the National Wealth Fund and British Business Bank, and reform, particularly to planning, but also regulatory reforms, cutting the administrative burden of regulation, pensions reform to unlock private capital. And one of the biggest reforms is the trade reforms we're making, whether that's the reset of our relation with the EU, the trade deal that we've signed with India, or indeed the trade deal that we've signed with the United States, and the planning and infrastructure bill that should have royal assent before Christmas. All of those things are pro-growth, and whether the OBR score them or not, I am confident, we are confident as a team, that they will build a stronger, more resilient economy with higher growth. And the good thing about the growth that we are generating, it is growth that will be felt in all parts of the country.
Thank you, Chancellor.
Thank you. And does the Treasury, I presume you collect your own scorings of those measures that don't meet the OBR's new thresholds?
Well, of course, we look at what we think the growth impacts of different policies will be. But as I say, we don't prioritise things based on whether we think the OBR will take them into account. We prioritise them based on the impact we think that they will have on growth. And certainly the trade deals, those 3 trade deals, and hopefully more to come, I think will have a significant impact.
Thank you for now, Ms Young. Bobby Dean MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, you spoke about your decision in this budget to increase your headroom to around about 22 billion. We had a discussion about headroom in the spring statement, where you said to me that everyone would like more headroom, but no one wants more taxes, no one wants lower spending. I think we have the balance about right. And you gave me variations to that answer 3 times. Do you accept now that actually you got that balance wrong in the spring?
Well, I increased taxes by £40 billion in the budget last year, and I don't remember any party clamouring for more tax increases. And in fact, I think the Liberal Democrats oppose most of the ones that we are trying to take forward. So I did think we got the balance about right last year, but I was really clear that one of the objectives of this budget was to build further resilience and we were able to do that with £21.7 billion of headroom.
I know it seems esoteric, but I mean we've had reports coming out that saying that the inflated debt costs to the UK are worth about £7 billion a year. And we've all reflected on the speculation that's gone around this budget in terms of tax measures for the last 6 months, the policy uncertainty perhaps putting off investment as well. And so you obviously felt the need to correct the level of headroom this time. So why was it not a mistake previously to maintain a low amount of headroom in the spring?
Well, headroom went as low as £6.5 billion in the last Parliament. I built it up to £9.9 billion in my budget last year and in the spring statement. I felt that was the right approach. But obviously, since then, we have had a number of global shocks. Whether those are shocks to trade, whether those are ongoing conflicts, whether those are disruptions to supply chains. And as a result, I believed it was the right thing to increase that headroom further to £21.7 billion, given the world in which we live
I think
today.
that was clear in last spring. But to move on to the second decision you've taken.
That's not
you
the
can
case.
can I ask my next question?
Well, just because when people come back and say, well, that was the case in the spring.
I asked these exact questions in the spring because you had to do a fiscal repair job in the spring,
yes.
obviously. We did have Trump's election already take place at that time. You had already lost the headroom between the autumn and the spring. So I think it's fair to say that many people thought that that headroom was already low in the spring. You've decided to correct it this time, but you're telling me it wasn't a mistake not to correct it in the spring.
Well, in the spring, the headroom would have been eroded without the actions that I took. I took the actions to keep the headroom at around £10 billion. But since then, you'll remember, the tariffs were introduced by Donald Trump that had not happened, and the OBR had not factored those into their forecasts in the spring. So I think things have changed since then, with respect, Mr. Dean.
I'd like to move on also to the decision to move towards one formal assessment by the OBR as well. Again, back in the spring, you said, some people were saying, don't worry about the headroom, you can address it in the autumn. I felt that would be the wrong decision because we've been very clear in our manifesto and our election campaign, and since we came to office, that fiscal stability is so important. So it's my understanding now that you're not going to make any adaptations based on what happened to headroom in the spring. So does that mean that fiscal stability is no longer important, or was that an incorrect statement to make in the spring?
Well, it does link to your previous question, Mr. Dean, because in the previous question you asked about the level of the headroom. We've now taken that to £21.7 billion, which, as you know, is more than the average movement in headroom between forecasts. So I now believe that we have the buffer in place.
The buffer enables you to make that decision.
So
can I just push you on the next question, which is... what circumstances would you feel like you would need to make adjustments in a spring statement? So 22 billion definitely gives you more buffer room, but is an erosion of 5 billion, 10 billion, 15 billion too much? At what point would you act in the spring instead of the autumn to address the headroom, which everybody will still be able to see whether or not a formal assessment is taking place?
So very few countries have two fiscal events a year, and we want to move towards, as the IMF have recommended, to have one major fiscal event a year. And we've worked with the
in
OBR.
answer to Mr. Dean's question, if you may, just on where you would make judgment.
At what point would you give yourself more headroom? Understand that.
Yeah, we've
and
got the question.
You're not going to take any
so
action.
The Chancellor's had the question, so
yeah,
if you could just answer the question, Chancellor.
Yes, if you give me that opportunity, I'd be delighted to. I reserve the right to be able to take action at any point, but I believe the headroom that we have and the changes that we've made means that I won't need to do that in the spring. But of course, I reserve the right at any time to take action.
Thank you for now, Mr. Dean. Are you a young MP?
Thank you. I wanted to move on to special educational needs and disabilities funding. At the budget, you announced that this would no longer be borne by local authorities, but would be borne from central departmental spending. Will this be put, well, firstly, the OBR says that this will cost around 5.6 billion. Do you and the Treasury accept that number? And will this be put on one particular department, or will it be spread among a number of departments? And if so, how will it be spread among departments?
Chancellor.
Thank you very much for that question. What we have done, what we did in the spending review, was continue the statutory override for an additional 2 years, so during which time local governments, if they overspend, compared with their forecasts on this, they can put the costs on central government. We've extended that for a further couple of years, but then, as we were really clear in the spending review, we will then fund SEND through the overall government DEL override envelope, and that statutory override ends in 2027-28. Where I would sort of disagree with the OBR, and well, not necessarily disagree, but the OBR looked at absorbing that SEND pressure from just one budget line. That is not what we said in the spending review. They just gave that as an illustrative example. So I don't recognise those impacts on school spending. As you know, the Education Secretary at the moment, with the relevant minister, is doing a review of SEND. That focus of that review is getting the system right, because no parent, no constituency MP believes the system works well today.
Thank you. Ms. Yang.
You're saying that the 5.6 billion number from the OBR is based on the current policy, and that policy is going to change, so therefore the number itself may not be that number. Is that what you're saying, Chancellor?
No, what I was saying is that the OBR's illustrative example is that SEND pressure is absorbed on one budget line. That is not what we set out. But the purpose of the SEND review is about delivering a system that works for families, for children, and for schools. And it's right that the Education Secretary, not the Chancellor, leads on that.
Yeah. Ms. Coughlin, MP.
Thank you. Chancellor, in October 2021, my 17-year-old constituent, Jennifer Chalkley, who was autistic, died of avoidable suicide. I fully acknowledge the role that perhaps the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives had in terms of scrapping Sure Start, in terms of contributing to this crisis. Can I have your assurance, please, that you will properly fund both the Department for Education and Children's Mental Health Services to end the SEND crisis in this country? Because if you do, not only would that be a fantastic legacy for a Labour government, but also it would enable me to go back to Jen's mum and tell her that her daughter's death had not been in vain.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and for bringing up that example, and please give best wishes of me and I think all of the committee to Jen's family for what they went through. too many parents and children are let down by the SEND system. Anyone that's a parent knows that. And any constituency MP, and you've only been a constituency MP for a year and a half, but you will know through your postbag and through your surgeries and your visits to your schools and talking to families in your constituency that the system just doesn't work. And we have to reform it. My mum was a special needs teacher when I was little, and she then became a classroom teacher because there were cuts then to special needs teaching, and it meant that kids weren't getting the support they needed. So this is something that matters to me, including as a parent, but it should not be me leading the work on SEND. I'm the Chancellor. It is right that Bridget Phillipson and the Department for Education lead on this, but to say to Jen's parents and family directly, we want this system to work for them. We want it to work for families. We want it to work for young people. We know it's let them down. This is about devising a system that is inclusive and that enables all children, whatever their abilities, whatever challenges that they face, to fulfil their potential and to live fulfilling lives. And that is the commitment I will give to Jen's parents and to
We
you.
obviously all look forward to the SEND review coming out, we think, in the new year. Thank you very much, Mr Coughlin. Yuan Yang MP.
Thank you, Chair. Yesterday we spoke to the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, and as you may have seen, there was disagreement on the committee, and there has been since their last meeting, on the impact of quantitative tightening of the active sales of gilts on the interest rates that the government faces for government borrowing. The bank staff's estimate of this cost to the taxpayer has gone up over the last year. Does the Treasury have its own estimates of the cost of quantitative tightening to the taxpayer?
If it's okay, I'm going to pass this question. We've discussed this at length, but I'll pass it to the Permanent Secretary.
It falls to the lot of being Treasury Permanent Secretary to have to answer questions about quantitative tightening. So it's a monetary policy matter, as you know, and as such for the Bank of England. But in terms of understanding what is happening, because it's a deeply complex thing, it's worth saying that there are three areas where you send out. So the OBR, in their recent forecast, set out detailed projections, including of the losses they expect and the impact on all their fiscal metrics. The Treasury's annual report and accounts sets out the impact on departmental spending budgets, and the bank provides quarterly reports with its projections of cash transfers. Yeah. To the nub of your question, each September, the Monetary Policy Committee decide on what they want to do in terms of sales for the coming year, and they announce that. That's not something that we is our decision. They did that last September. They actually reduced some of the active sales they were doing and did some things on skew. So
they're increasing their active sales.
No, they've reduced.
They're reducing the overall pace of
I think more things are maturing, so there's less need for active sales. It is all set out there, and it is all in our accounts and all the rest of it. Okay. And of course, as everyone knows, there were cash transfers to the Treasury up until the end of 2022, and now each quarter there's transfers back to the AP. Yeah.
Chancellor, I know that from the MPC's perspective, as they've stated very clearly, value for money for the taxpayer is not in their remit in monetary policy. But of course, as the Chancellor and as the Treasury, value for money is certainly something that concerns the Treasury and also all of us constituency MPs. Do you have conversations with the Governor about the value for money impact on the taxpayer from their pace of QT?
I don't think it's accurate to say that value for money doesn't need to be taken into account. Value for money does.
Yeah, the MPC states that they do not take that into account in their principles because that is not one of theirs.
Yeah, but the Bank of England do, and the MPC and the Bank of England are a little bit different. I don't know, James.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's their decision and it's not ours, but I think I think it is unfair to say that they don't take value for money into account. Yeah. They take that into account as well as the impact on their monetary policy. And they've written to the committee a whole set of times, including on that, and I think you did a report on it last year, which explored those very issues.
Thank you, Rachel. The predecessor committee did good work on that. Luke Murphy, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, my constituents, or a vast majority of them, the top priority is cost of living. Both yourself and the Prime Minister have made clear that is a top priority for the government as well. Evidence to the committee from both the OBR and the Resolution Foundation show that there's been relatively strong growth in real household disposable income in this Parliament thus far, but the outcome for the remainder of the Parliament is quite bleak. Do you recognise those forecasts? Do you expect to beat them? And if so, how?
Thank you very much for that question. I think the growth rate of RHDI per capita is expected to be positive in every year of the forecast. But you're right to say, and this reflects the answer I gave, I think, to John Grady earlier about the impact of the productivity downgrade isn't just a fiscal impact. That's the one that all the concentration has been on, but of course the most immediate impact is on the size of the economy, and therefore the money available for wages and everything else, which is why, as I said, I'm determined to beat that forecast. But living standards, I guess, are sort of determined by the income you've got coming in and how much you're paying out. And as I said in my speech on the 4th of November, I was determined that one of the things that we achieved in this budget was cutting the cost of living. And as the Deputy Governor said yesterday, next year that will be 0.4, 0.5% off of CPI. There are sort of three primary things we're doing to achieve that. The £150 off of energy bills by scrapping eco entirely and taking other levies off bills, freezing prescription charges for the second year in a row, and also freezing rail fares, which I know will be a big issue for constituents of yours in Basingstoke, the first time that's happened in 30 years.
Thank you. Do you anticipate having to come back in future budgets to take similar measures on the cost of living? Is that something you would expect, given the outlook for living standards that the OBR and you have just recognised?
Chancellor.
Well, I think the OBR and the bank expect inflation to peak this year, to fall, I think, on average of 2.5% next year before reaching target at 2% the following year, and for the remainder of the forecast period. The reductions in energy bills and the freeze in other prices, and indeed the freeze in fuel duty until September next year, all contribute to inflation coming down quicker than would have than we previously thought. We then need to continue trying to boost productivity and growth to put more money in people's pockets, but the focus in this budget was specifically on costs, which is why we introduced that package of measures.
Thank you very much. Jim Dixon, MP.
Yeah, I think many people will welcome the redistribution within the budget, where you can see each decile as you go lower down the income scale doing better. Do you, however, believe that might be a problem, the squeezed middle problem that we've seen in this country for many years, in which people in the middle of the income distribution are finding it very difficult to maintain their living standards, particularly as they get further towards the tax thresholds in which their income is then taxed at a higher rate?
Mm-hmm. First of all, Mr Dixon, I'm very disappointed you haven't mentioned the Lower Thames crossing. I think it's the first time I've had a conversation with you and you haven't. But I will address your actual question. The distribution analysis that we published alongside the budget shows that every income decile, except for the top, is better off through the measures that we have taken in the last two budgets, but the biggest beneficiaries are in the bottom couple of income deciles, particularly as we lift children out of poverty, which we're very, very pleased to be able to do at this budget. I do recognise that we've asked everyone to contribute by freezing the thresholds for an additional 3 years on top of the 7 years for which they've already been frozen, but we were able to keep those contributions to a minimum by asking those with the broader shoulders to pay more, and some of those specific taxes, whether it's on landlords, to rebalance the tax system, but so that whatever form of income you have, we're narrowing the gap between the tax rates that you pay on it and things like the high value council tax, which obviously paid by some of the more wealthy people in the country.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Okay, thank you very much. Bobby Dean.
Thank you. Just following on from that question about the squeeze from Israel, there's been some analysis done since the budget about the impact on the 1% or even the 0.1% 1%, and people claim that if you look at those categories, it's not as distributive as the Treasury's graphs present. Mr. Bowler, do you do any analysis, distribution analysis, in regards to the 1% or 0.1% internally?
Well, we do. No, we do. Our focus is on the distribution analysis we do, which is really, really rather good, I have to say. I'm very proud of it. It's deeply thorough. It's been complimented for how we do it and the level we get into. All the rest of it, we've done it for some time in that way. So that's the focus we do, and it focuses on deciles. I don't know whether Darmish has any more to say on that.
So we focus on deciles, as the PEMSEC says. We don't have the data on a consistent basis to be able to do things like the top 0.1%. Obviously, that doesn't stop in individual policies from being able to look at focuses of distribution.
Chancellor, I just wanted to ask you if you recognise this analysis that's out there. There's obviously increasing scrutiny about the top 1% and the top 0.1%, particularly as those on middle to higher incomes are starting to really feel the pinch. Do you think that it would be a good idea for the Treasury to start modelling this as well, so you can get a true distributive effect?
I think it is quite hard because of the numbers, but let me just sort of give you one example. Higher value council tax on properties more than £2 million affects less than 1%. Is it 0.6?
Just under 1%.
Yeah, okay. Just under 1% of properties. The non-dom changes obviously affects a very small number of people, as does the change around treating carried interests as income rather than capital gains in private equity. So all of those are taxes paid by a very small number of the most wealthy people.
Would you commit to trying to look into that in the future?
As I say, it is quite hard just because of the numbers involved to have an accurate
You could have a dialogue in writing about this, because I think it's an interesting point, and you rightly raise
we can, but I would just caution.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm recognising your caution, and maybe it's a conversation we can have through official routes. Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. And Chancellor, we want to talk about some of the specific measures. We've obviously know your broad brush issues, which you've repeated a few times, so we don't need to go into those again. If we can answer we'll ask specific questions. If you can answer those, then you can tell us all the detail of your budget. So over to Mr. John Glenn to kick off.
Yes, could I turn first to threshold freezes, Chancellor? At the 24 budget, you said, I'm keeping every single promise on tax that I made in our manifesto, so there'll be no extension of the freeze in income tax and national insurance thresholds. Now, you told us earlier it's not a breach of the manifesto. How can we square those two statements?
Our manifesto was very clear. It referred to the rates of income tax and national insurance and the rate of VAT. But I have been very clear, I'm not trying to shy away from it in any way, that this is everyone makes a contribution through freezing those thresholds. I'm not trying to sort of sneak it out and pretend it doesn't exist. I was very explicit in the speech that I gave in the Chamber and in every subsequent interview that working people will pay from 2028 a bit more in tax, but we've managed to keep that as low as possible because of the other changes that we've introduced.
But do you recognise, if you look at the distributional analysis, that increasing the headline rate of income tax is more progressive than threshold freezes?
I don't recognise that. I think that they are broadly similar. So no, I don't recognise that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Chancellor, you obviously took a decision to change the way that salary sacrifice worked. Can you just explain what was the reason? I mean, obviously you had to raise money. Was there a particular reason you focused on that area?
Yeah. So the cost of salary sacrifice left unchecked will go up by 3 times in the next few years.
So it'll multiple of 3.
Yeah. So no one had expected that when salary sacrifice schemes started getting up and running. We already spend £70 billion a year on pensions tax relief. We're not changing that at all, and nor are we changing how much you can take out tax-free as a lump sum. But salary sacrifice was only ever really expected to top up pensions rather than being the main vehicle.
It was pensions that was your particular focus, because obviously salary sacrifices for other things. It wasn't because people were using it for other approaches.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have salary sacrifice for other things like gym membership, extra holiday, or expensive bikes. Yeah.
No, the focus on this was around the tax treatment for salary sacrifice for pension savings.
Because Tom Joseph told us last week that it was likely to reduce pension savings, and obviously there's a big concern about people not, especially young people. There's a lot of evidence they're not saving enough for their pensions. How did you weigh up that impact with the decision to reduce salary sacrifice for pensions?
Well, in the last few years, pension savings have increased, primarily because of automatic enrolment into pensions. I think about 11 million people who weren't previously saving for pensions are now doing so. I think the last few years, cost of living has put pressure on how much people can put in to save for retirement, but hopefully that is beginning to ease as a pressure. But you can still put £2,000 in and have exactly the same tax benefits as you previously had, but any contribution over £2,000, which you're still able to make, will get the pension tax relief, but not the additional salary sacrifice relief. And that is the tax relief that was always supposed to be applied to pensions. Salary sacrifice was only ever expected to top up pensions, but it has been increasingly use of the main vehicle. And also we saw a lot of people paying bonuses, large bonuses, in through salary sacrifice to take advantage of that tax treatment in a way that just was never envisaged. And one of the things that we did in this budget, one of the things I did in this budget was to ensure that some things that were introduced for very good reason but have ended up costing multiples more than what were originally expected, that we took them back to their original purpose. And that's the same for things like employee ownership trusts, for example.
There's a lot of, we haven't got time to go into all of it today, and maybe we should have the Pensions Minister in on this, but our sister committee deals with pension policy. But you've got on the one hand an encouragement to put into stocks and shares ISAs, which we'll be touching on in a moment. You've then decreasing the opportunity to top up pension, and a 5% contribution, as Ruth Curtis told us last week, on an individual earning $46,000 a year means they will have to pay more national insurance. So you've got different incentives working in different ways. Is there any plans in the Treasury to have a really good route, well, from Treasury with DWP, to have a root and branch review of how pensions policy works? Because, as you say, auto-enrolment's been very useful, but it's not enough to fund retirement.
We have set up a pensions commission. The Minister for Pensions has done that, who will look at these issues. But I want to be very, very clear that people can still use salary sacrifice to save for a pension. They will have, and they will still get pensions tax relief, which is the usual way of saving for a pension. So pensions tax relief above £2,000 very much still exists. It will be ordinary pensions tax relief, though.
Thank you for that. Dame Harriet-Fordman.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, in your budget you say that the High Street will benefit from permanently lower business rates for retail, hospitality and leisure. And I think you will have heard that the reality for a lot of these High Street businesses is in fact that they're looking at the detail and they feel that they will struggle to survive with the higher rates bills that are coming, on top of the rising employment costs, on top of their rising energy bills. To give a few examples, and we'll all have heard them in our constituency postbags, pubs are facing a 15% rise. There's music venues in Newcastle, 431% rise. The British Beer and Pub Association says community pubs up 63%. So would you accept, Chancellor, that a lot of these businesses feel misled by that statement?
So let me set out what is happening with business rates, because there's a couple of things happening at the same time. The last time that the Valuation Office looked at the rateable values of property was in 2021, and of course that was in the middle of the pandemic. And so many rateable values fell sharply during the pandemic. They've now been revalued, and of course those rateable values are now higher because we are no longer during a lockdown in a pandemic. At the same time, during the pandemic, there was temporary support given to a number of businesses to support them with business rates. The previous government put in temporary support that finished in the last year of that government. They didn't allocate any money for future. In my first budget, I put in additional support for the first year, and in this budget we've put another £4.3 billion of additional support in as we transition to more normal valuations and rates. But what we've also done in this budget is to permanently lower the business rates, the tax rates that are applied to properties for eligible retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, and that is paid for by a higher rate on the top 1% of properties, particularly distribution centres that are used by online companies. So there will be permanently lower rates for those sectors. But as we transition, we've put in £4.3 billion of support for the types of businesses that you refer to. And so I think the average pub will be getting a 4% increase in rates this year, and the rates are capped at 15% or £800 for smaller venues this year, and that support continues at a phased down rate for the next couple of years. But we're moving to a system where we have permanently lower rates on those venues.
Can I just urge you to look at this again, Chancellor, because UK Hospitality would dispute that. They think a 15% hike on average for pubs. So I'll just leave that out there.
Thank you very much.
15% is the cap. So that's the highest it can be.
They're saying the average pub will get that cap.
No.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah. No, the average is 4% and there's a cap of 15%.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarity, Chancellor. Danger Vaughan McDonald.
Thank you. Chancellor, we're aware of a kind of intergenerational unfairness that is perceived as going on, and I just wanted to look at the issues of lifetime ISAs that you announced in your budget. Now, everybody accepts that lifetime ISAs have design flaws, but launching a full consultation and creating a completely new product which may not exist for some years, feels like a disproportionate response to problems that could potentially be fixed within the current system. Why not simply fix the existing lifetime ISA rather than design a completely new product that young first-time buyers may take some time to see?
There's a lot of scepticism about the current product. A lot of lenders won't offer it because of design flaws in the way it was set up and a lack of clarity about who the product is suitable for. And many lenders don't want to, many banks and societies don't want to offer it because they don't want to be later accused of misselling a product. So there are a number of flaws with the existing system, and there have been a number of criticisms, including from people like Martin Lewis, about the withdrawal fees and also about the value of property that you can buy, and also the confusion about whether it is a vehicle for saving for retirement or a vehicle for paying for your for a first home. So we are now doing a proper piece of work, designing a better product that's much clearer to people, and we certainly don't intend this to take a number of years.
Do you have any idea of timescales?
We want to crack on with it, but we didn't feel ready this budget to announce a new product that we would have confidence in. So we want to take a little bit longer to get that right. But there are well-documented concerns about the lifetime ISA. We want to help people to get on the housing ladder. Not convinced that the product that we've got is working well enough for people today.
And just looking at the age differential for investing in a cash ISA, do you think it's fair that young people who want to save for that mortgage deposit are being forced into a more volatile stocks and shares, while retirees are allowed greater freedom to save in cash? Why was 65 chosen rather than the state pension age? And do you think that this creates a real perception of unfairness for young savers who are anxious about not having too much risk and knowing that they can get that deposit?
Yeah. There aren't many young people that can put aside £20,000 a year in savings. I think we all know that. The biggest challenge for young people today is getting a job that pays a decent wage, not about whether they can access the full £20,000 of ISA savings. The reason that we had that age limit in is because as you get older, the time horizon in which you're investing in is not as long for obvious reasons, and so we wanted to make sure that in later life you can be very confident that you've got that money there. But if you had invested £1,000 a year in an ISA from 1999 to now, if you'd put that £1,000 a year into a stocks and shares ISA, you'd have £50,000 more now in your account than if you'd put it into a cash ISA. And I want more people to be able to benefit from a growing economy and growing stock markets. And at the moment, a combination of those ISA limits, but also the advice and guidance rules, mean that very few people, not enough people, are benefiting from that. We're changing advice and guidance. That comes in from the next tax year. The ISA changes come in the tax year after that. So we've got time to test out how this new advice and guidance is going to work. But it will enable banks and building societies and others to nudge people into putting their money into more productive assets. And I would like to see more of a culture in the UK of retail investing and people of all ages being able to benefit from a growing economy.
Okay. Is that not going to require more financial education in school?
Yeah, and we are, as part of the financial inclusion strategy that my colleague, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Lucy Rigby, introduced, the financial inclusion strategy, we are introducing, including at primary schools, a better education on budgeting and saving. I think that is an important part of it, but the advice and guidance reforms are things that people have been calling for a long time, and I'm confident working with the regulators, the banks and building societies, it will result in better outcomes for savers.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dame Siobhan. Bobby Dean MP.
Chair, Chancellor, just now you mentioned wanting to fix some of the tax relief so they operate as intended. You'll be aware, I think there's over 1,200 on the books, and I think only around 300 of them have ever been properly evaluated for their cost and their effectiveness. I presented a bill to Parliament called Tax Measures Evaluation Bill, where it commits the government to look into all of them. Can you commit to look into all the tax reliefs and making sure they are all working as intended?
So I hope you see in this budget and last year's budget, actually primarily due to the work from the former Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury, who's now the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and the new Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury. We've done some really good work on cracking down on tax avoidance and closing loopholes. I think it's going to save something like £10 billion a year by the final year of the forecast. And that is just getting the tax that we are already due, but we're not collecting today. And that's both debt and also
Just question, will you commit to looking at them all?
We're very happy. And if you've got any ideas, we're also always in the market, Mr. Dean. So we've already done a lot of work in this area, but the job is not done until there is a gap between the tax that is due and the tax that is paid. There is more work to do. So of course we'll carry on looking at all of those.
Thank you. I think you'd have a lot of support from both this committee and the sister committee, the Public Accounts Committee, which have doggedly tried to get to the bottom of this. So if you want to lean into that, I'm sure you'll get some help from Parliament. Yuan Yang MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, in your budget speech, you mentioned that a fair society is one where the wealthiest pay their fair share, and you discussed narrowing the gap between the tax on income from assets and income from work. Is there more left of that gap to be narrowed?
So what we did what I did in the budget was to increase by 2 percentage points the basic rate on dividend savings and property income, and made some changes to the additional higher rates as well. I think that is the right thing to do. 2 percentage point increase is quite a big increase in the tax rate on any form of income, but I think we got the balance right in the budget on that.
And is there space for more narrowing, or do you believe the gap has been fully closed now?
Well, obviously, if you go out to work, you pay national insurance, and you don't pay national insurance on other forms of income. But we have taken action in this budget to narrow the gap between those different forms of income.
Thank you very much, Ms Yang. Jim Dixon, MP.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Big change in the budget on electric vehicle excise duty. We haven't had that tax before. Obviously, it's designed to compensate for the loss of fuel duty over time. Isn't there a big problem, though, that by 2050, electric vehicle excise duty will only be bringing in about a quarter of what fuel duty did? So is it not inevitable you're going to have to very significantly raise that amount going forward?
Well, we have set the level of the EVED at half the rate that you would get from fuel duty. I think that is the right balance, because we do want to incentivise the rollout of electric vehicles for reasons that is well understood. We have no plans to increase that further, and wouldn't do so until the move to electric vehicles is well secured. But we've set it at a half rate for a reason.
And in terms of fuel duty and the freeze, what's your commitment going forward around what happens into the future on that, and the plan to end the freeze in a year's time?
So we've frozen it until September next year, but at the same time we're also, from early in the new year, introducing something new called the Fuel Finder. This is work that's been led by the Competition and Markets Authority, and something that other countries already do, that will mean that real-time information will be available on fuel costs at different petrol stations, and we hope to be able to integrate that with the different apps that people use to map their journeys and everything, and so they'll be able to see the different prices at different petrol stations on their route, and evidence from other countries and from the CMA, I think, suggests that could take off around £40 a year from how much people pay in filling up their tanks, and I hope will result in more competition and lower prices for consumers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Dixon. And John Glenn, MP.
Yes, could I turn to gambling taxes, please, Chancellor? The consultation that you had began with a desire to simplify, and indeed this committee looked at the matter as well. We're now, after your measures in the budget, we've got online bets duty higher than the high street. We've got bets on UK racing lower than Irish racing. We've got tax on a game of football on the phone will be 25%, while a machine in adult gaming centre will be 20%. Now, you've given 26 million to the Gambling Commission, but there is a significant risk, and I think we're seeing it already online, of lots of activity going off to the black market. I'm just wondering, what your overall assessment is of the measures that you've made, and if you could address, the fact that there are sort of multiple dimensions to what you've ended up with here.
So we did have a consultation, and we've been consulting for around a year on this. I think that is a good way to make policy, and we've spoken to all the different stakeholders, and that's why there was a lot of things going on. So we decided not to do anything about in-person betting, to do nothing around horse racing, and also we've managed to take tax off bingo entirely, because I think there's lots of good social benefits. We also didn't do anything about machine gambling, because we were concerned around things like seaside towns and around incomes in pubs, for example. But there was plenty of evidence that online gaming in particular, but also betting, does result in more serious harms than in person, and that's why we chose the package that we chose, which had the biggest increases for online gaming and then increases for online betting. And actually there was a wider theme in the budget about rebalancing the tax system away from taxing physical trading and more tax online. That's true for business rates. It's true for taxing low value, applying customs to low value imports, and it also applies to gambling. That was a theme running through the budget, that high street should not be undercut by online. But there's a specific issue here as well about the harms that have been doing. Now, you mentioned the black market. That, of course, was something that we factored into our deliberations when we designed this policy. And obviously, we could have taken those tax rates higher, but we chose not to, exactly because of the concerns that you have mentioned. And we've also put money into at the budget to tackle the issues of the illegal market. £26 million allocated to the Gambling Commission.
Can I just ask you finally on that? I understand your logic, but some of these companies are configured with cross subsidies in different parts of their business, and you know, in essence, do you expect to see a restructuring in the industry now consequential of this? Because it seems quite likely that some will not find it viable because of the nature of the subsidy from different parts of their businesses, and some of them are already going into difficulties and going offshore.
Well, obviously these taxes apply whether the company is offshore or not, because it is a tax on the bet. And again, that was an important design of this policy, that you can't just relocate overseas to get out of paying that tax. We also are making it relatively more attractive to do betting in real life rather than online, and that was a deliberate design of the policy. Look, I recognise that everything has consequences, but so do the harms of gambling have consequences, and you know that was also a consideration in this budget. There has been a huge growth in online betting and gaming, and I think it is right that we tax it more appropriately and have a level playing field between the high street and online businesses. And of course, all the money from this is being used to reduce child poverty.
Thank you, and thank you for that, because with this committee cross-party, obviously put out our report on that very point. So thank you for that answer and for that action. Luke Murphy, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, the capital allowance changes in the budget, could you set out how they will increase investment and growth, given that tax specialists like Dan Needle have said they believe the changes will do the opposite?
So we have kept the main rate of corporation taxes at 25%, and we've stuck to all of the commitments we made in the business tax roadmap that I published at the last budget. We also have one of the most generous and competitive capital allowances regimes. And what we are doing, what I have done at the budget, is decreasing the main rate of write-down allowances, just the main rate, by 4 percentage points to 14% from April next year. And that has allowed us to fund a new first-year allowance, whilst also raising revenue to protect public finances. So it's also consistent with what we're trying to do in introducing more generous upfront relief for investments, and we'll be doing that as well for some of those leasing of equipment and machinery that isn't eligible for the full expensing, to now get a more generous first year allowance. This is about trying to encourage investment, but it is within the context as well of needing to raise money in this budget. But I think the net present value of investments remains the same.
The first year discount that doesn't apply to second-hand assets. It is only to leasing. So
you can see the direction of travel though. So we've made permanent full expensing, and this year for things that aren't covered by full expensing, we're introducing a more generous first year allowance. But if you're asking, is there more to do on this? Yes, I think there is in a range of areas like the one you've mentioned, also on more around intangibles. But what we're trying to do is incentivise investment, because investment is absolutely key to economic growth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Murphy. Bobby Dean, MP.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could ask you about one small thing that happened after the budget, which is the US-UK trade deal over drugs, and it's going to cost apparently an extra £3 billion per year. There's been a lot of worry from NHS leaders about where that money's going to come from. Is that to come from within the existing Department of Health and Social Care budget?
That was part of the agreement in the spending review, that for this spending review period that would be absorbed. The costs are actually quite low in the first couple of years, and that was part of the spending review settlement. But obviously, at future spending reviews,
will be worked out in the next spending review.
Well, obviously, everything in the next spending review will be set out in the next spending review.
Thank you.
Chris Coughlin, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, just a quick follow-up on R&D. Draghi in September urged the EU to...
The man with a dog with a bone here.
Nothing but predictable.
Exactly. No, next one's up. Urged the EU to borrow for defence R&D, stating that that would actually decrease debt to GDP, because GDP would grow faster than interest costs, and also that a 2% increase in total factor productivity would cut public finance burden by a third over a decade. Do you think a similar principle could apply, or approach could apply, to the UK?
So we're already embarking on the biggest uplift in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, taking it to 2.6% by April 2027. And although every department apart from the NHS and Defence have had to make some further efficiency savings towards the end of the Parliament, that is not the case. Well, they have to make efficiency savings, but they can reinvest them. Unlike other departments, and we have totally protected the capital budgets, and obviously defence is highly capital intensive. The changes that I made to the fiscal rules last year as well take capital spending outside the stability rule. It's still affected by the investment rule, but that has also made it easier to protect capital spending, because it has been the case that previous chancellors, when faced with challenging fiscal situations, would go first to the capital budget and delay projects or cancel projects or extend the life of projects, and that's not the decision that I wanted to make. But it's also really important that we spend the money well, and that's why, as part of the defence investment plan, we are allocating more money to start-up businesses, to tech businesses, to really get that innovation, actually building on quite a lot of what happens in the US.
Thank you.
And finally, as you know, the National Bureau of Economic Research in the US has published an estimate of the Brexit cost of 6 to 8% of GDP, effectively a 90 billion Brexit black hole. Given this, do you support the Liberal Democrat proposals for an EU customs union, several Labour MPs do?
Good try. I think the OBR is sticking to their numbers around of a 4% hit, but it's still very material. It's why we've got this reset with the EU, and why we are at the moment negotiating around a new food and farming agreement, energy trading, electricity trading, Erasmus, and a new youth mobility scheme, because we recognise that making it hard to trade with your nearest neighbours and trading partners is not exactly good for businesses and not exactly very good for growth.
Thank you. Well, I think we can all agree on that. Just wanted to quickly follow up on an answer you gave to Mr. Glenn about threshold freezes. And it is, the facts are that if somebody is earning around £70,000 a year, which is a lot in known parts of the country, but in parts of London, for example, that's not a salary that's as easy to live on as it may sound. Somebody on that salary will see roughly the same tax rise as a Premier League footballer or other high earners. do you talked? Yeah, do you see that as progressive?
I think the question that Mr. Glenn was putting to me was whether increasing rates versus freezing would be much different. And overall, and I would say that 70,000 is around twice the national average wage.
But is that somebody who should be paying the same roughly as a Premier League?
Well, they're not paying the same, are they?
Well, the same tax rise. The rise would be similar.
Well, our distribution analysis shows that they are pretty similar, but I would also say that 70,000 is going to put you in the top decile.
So when you say pretty similar, just to be clear, the threshold freeze versus any tax increase, that's what you're referring to when you say similar?
Yes, the answer
no, just making sure, just because in the record. You obviously will do modelling of impact of policies on different households. With the challenge with the decisions you've made, because you've got lots of different tax changes, is how they interact with each other. How have you changed any way that, partly because you've taken that approach, any way you're doing that evaluation of impact on certain types of households?
Well, the OBR look at the interaction of policies when they look at the indirect effects of the budget package as a whole, so they are taken into account in the forecast, and the distribution analysis obviously takes into account all of the policies and how they interact with each other.
Often the problem is there's unintended consequences. There's nothing different the Treasury is doing on this. You're relying on the OBR. Just a simple question.
Of course, we look at these things ourselves, but the numbers that published, including the indirect
you do
effects,
look at them yourselves as well, so you're taking that fully into account.
Well, yes, we look at things like, the sectoral impact of policies, the policies on families with children, the policies on pensioner households.
I just wanted it clear for the record, because
yes.
Just that you do that, that's fine. And then you talked about efficiencies for departments. And you're tracking that closely. So perhaps really for the Permanent Secretary, has anything changed in the way that the Treasury is tracking those efficiencies compared with the past?
No, from the past, I guess the fact that we use the Office for Value for Money to come in and work with departments to set up and measure, set up what the efficiencies would be, that was announced as Penny View, and set out how they'll be measured, including, I think, referencing in annual report and accounts. So that's new from previous spending reviews.
Okay, and because there's no Office of Value for Money now, so that's now back into the Treasury teams.
They've done exactly what we asked them really well, and that's now all set up.
The public spending teams will be looking at that for each part, as usual. Okay, that's fine. Good. Harriet.
Thank you very much. This is just for Mr. Bowler. It's a technical point on the business rates questions I was asking the Chancellor earlier. The Treasury website gives some worked examples of how the transitional relief will be applied, and that is a maximum cap versus the 40% discount that was in place. The letter that's gone out from the Ministry of Housing and Local Government to the councils that will actually implement this change does not have the 40% in it. So actually is a much more significant increase. So could you take that away, Permanent Secretary, and just make sure that the letter that goes out from MHCLG is exactly consistent with the guidance of the Treasury and the intention that the Chancellor clearly set out in her reply?
Yeah. Can I also say, Dame Harriet, I recognise that businesses are crunching through all the numbers now, and I just would urge all businesses and also parliamentarians when we're interacting to make sure that businesses understand the transitional relief, because I know there have been a number of businesses who have seen the headlines without understanding the transitional relief, and obviously the two go together.
And
so
the letter apparently from MHCLG is incorrect, it sounds like, so perhaps that could be clarified.
That sounds like an urgent matter for the Permanent Secretary to get off. So on which point I will thank you, our witnesses, very much indeed. Thank you to the Chancellor, the Right Honourable Rachel Reeves MP. I'm not sure the budget never ends. You're probably thinking about the next one already, but at the end of this, sort of a full stop at the end of this budget cycle, to James Bowler, the Permanent Secretary, to Dharmesh Nai, first-time attendant at this session. The transcript of this session will be available on the website uncorrected in the next couple of days, with thanks to our colleagues at Hansard and thanks to Bowtie for the broadcasting. Thank you very much indeed. Order.